You guys are in trouble today. I'm recapping 2012, so I have my notes from the whole year.
Holy cow.
Wow. Just going to review. I'm kidding.
He needs more, Adam's getting more coffee. He's like, I'll be here a while.
Or he might be leaving.
People are leaving. It's be a long sermon.
No, but I heard about these two guys that were, see construction workers out here, even in wintertime, working and digging. Well, I heard these two construction workers, McGregor and McCarthy, they were out digging a ditch, and they happened to be digging a ditch for a pipeline or something in front of a well-known brothel, house of ill repute, And so they're digging, and then this taxi pulls up, and the local minister jumps out and runs inside. And McGregor just shakes his head and says, "Isn't that a shame?" He said, "And a man of the cloth. What do you think?" They just shake their heads. They keep digging. A few minutes later, another taxi pulls up, and the local rabbi jumps out and runs inside. And McCarthy just shakes his head and says, "Well, what's the world coming to? A person will stoop so low." And they shake their heads and keep digging. And then a few minutes later, another taxi pulls up, and their priest jumps out and runs inside. And they look at each other. And McGregor says, "Must be somebody mighty sick inside." So anyway, there's some truth to that, But welcome to the Love Your Life workshop. Love the person you are. Be the person you love, as it says on the wall. Then take that same care that you give yourself and respect that you give yourself and treat other people with the same respect and the same care and the same nurturing. Or in another way we put it, be the person that you most want to be. Now, January 1st, I came in and I said that, and I've said it every week since. So, it's been 53 weeks, and somehow I ended up with 52 lessons. I took 2 Sundays off, so I can't, but somehow in my notes I have 52 lessons. I think I prepared for one of those Sundays that I wasn't here. But for 53 weeks, really, we've been meeting and talking about becoming the person that you most want to be, the Love Your Life workshop. So, and I'm going to stay with that through 2013, but I wanted to wrap up this year with, and I thought a lot this week about how do I want to end this year. And the one thing I want to talk about is shining your light. So think about loving who you are, becoming the person that you most want to be. I want to kind of end this year with this thought: shine your light. Now, I was thinking about. I always think about what it would be like to be in the crowd when Jesus was walking around talking, and it was such a different culture than ours. In some ways, people were just the same, but the culture was different. There wasn't, in most cultures throughout society, there was not much of a middle class. In most cultures through history, there was basically a ruling wealthy class, and then people who were basically pretty poor and didn't have a whole lot of freedom. And even to some degree in our own culture, it's pretty much been true that where you're born, you pretty much stay in that social class. Okay, we tend to have more freedom in our country to move about within within the social classes. It can still be difficult, but there's more freedom that when you were born into a specific place in most cultures, and it was true of Jesus' culture, that's where you were. That's who you were for the most part. And so if you were not born a Pharisee or born into a family of wealth or influence, you lived a pretty difficult life. And you probably didn't dream of living anything but your life. This was your life. And so as Jesus went out and as a rabbi and traveled about talking, he had his close disciples, and then he had this group of people who were following, and then he also had some of the wealthy and influential people who would follow and listen. Now, a typical rabbi would have come from that wealthy ruling class. Jesus didn't. That's why sometimes people would say, Nazareth, what good comes out of Nazareth? And so he was a carpenter's son. This bothered them. This troubled them. Like, well, how can this be? The Pharisees come from Jerusalem, and we know what tribe they came from. We know who's their parents were. They know what kind of lineage they came from. But here's Jesus, and also his group of disciples were not young men who had grown up in wealthy families of influence they were not the highest educated people. They had been passed over. These were grown men, older men who had been passed over, who were just working men, and he grabbed them. One of them was even a tax collector. We've talked about that. One of them was an extremist. And, they had a political extremist back then. So he had this strange hodgepodge of people that were not the 12, 13-year-old best educated kids with the brightest future from wealthy families. It's the opposite. And so wherever he went, he had this group, and then he was surrounded by this other group of the lowly people who were just the masses of hard-working people who sweated every day to figure out how to have enough clothes, how to have enough food, and hope that they made it through life without getting some disease too quickly. And then on the outskirts, then on the edges of wherever we talk, where the wealthy and the ruling class. And so he kind of turned all that upside down. We talked about that a little bit earlier. From the normal rabbi who would have traveled with his select group, and then the wealthy and the religious, and maybe on the outside some people kind of listening in. So there was one time when Jesus went up on a mountain, and he said he called his disciples to him. And so there's his 12 apostles that he's called, or 12 disciples that he called, and maybe those others of this mass of people, ordinary people, who maybe dared to kind of come close and say, yeah, I'm a disciple. I'm listening. What do you have to say? But it was that group that Jesus spoke to. And he began to talk to them, and he began to look at them, and he called them poor in spirit. In one place, they're just called the poor. And there are people who were downtrodden, who had suffered. They were people who were meek, who owned nothing or owned very little. And he looks at them and he says, yours is the kingdom of heaven. You're blessed. You're the blessed ones. And see, all their lives they had seen it the opposite, that the blessed were the wealthy, the blessed were the people in power. But he looks at them and he said, you've suffered, but you're blessed because you're going to be comforted. He says, you have nothing, you have very little, you're meek, but you're blessed because you really inherit the whole earth. What God really brings to a person, you inherit. You have that. You're poor, but you're rich. Yours is the kingdom of heaven. And then he goes on, he keeps talking, and then he looks at this group of people that he had gathered around him as his disciples, and he says, you are the light of the world. He doesn't say, you could be the light of the world. He doesn't say, well, I've got a plan if you'll stay with me, and, I've got a program that you can go through and get a degree, and you'll be the light of the world. He says, you are the light of the world. And I try to picture how I might feel if I was just one of these people that felt forgotten in life. And felt like, life is for the privileged. For the rest of it's difficult. And Jesus looks at you, it looks at me and says, you're the light of the world. I feel like, me? God even knows I exist? Now, Jesus does also say that the light can be hidden. He says, so you don't take light and you don't cover it up, but you take off the cover for everyone to see. You're the light of the world. Now, so I think about that, and I think about what it would be like if Jesus looked at you, looked at me, and said, you're the light of the world. Now, where you are, who you are, in this world, in this place, in this time, in your family, in your situation, in your town, you are the light of the world. It's not, in the way that we normally look at it, it's not a religious issue. And see, this I think confused people. Jesus wasn't talking about, okay, well, here's how you're the light. You need to go join up with the religious people and get into the synagogues more. And then, no, he talked about matters of the heart, and he talked about matters of relationship with God and with other people, and character. He says, you're the light of the world. And I think about that. So I thought about that this week a lot, as I thought about it all year. Because I realized that this idea of being the light of the world is something Christians have known about and talked about for 2 centuries now. Something I've heard about all my life. I've been in churches and I've been in Bible studies. We're the light of the world. But the problem is most people walk out and don't feel like the light of the world. We don't really know what that experience is. It's kind of like, and I said this on the first day of the year, I've seen a lot of Christians who know the definition of grace, but don't feel forgiven. I've known a lot of Christians who know the definition of joy, but they don't walk with joy. I've known a lot of Christians who know we're the light of the world, we're the salt of the earth, but they don't feel like light and salt as they live. They don't experience it. You know? Or we know love. We can memorize 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, and all kinds of verses about love, but we haven't walked really in the experience of love. I can know that God loves me. God so loved me, so loved that world that he gave his son. And yet I don't love myself. There's something backwards. There's something wrong about that. To be able to say, I'm a new creation in Christ. In Christ, I'm a new creation. And yet I walk as if I'm the old creation. I walk with old labels of myself. I wake up every day with old labels, carrying around guilt, carrying around labels, and carrying around perceptions, my own perceptions of myself, of my old self, but not as light, not as salt, not as someone in whom the Spirit of Christ lives. And so it's about really getting into agreement with how God sees me. Every day waking up, and if I woke up and Jesus was there at my door and he said, you know, you're the light of the world as you walk out and live today, I might actually live differently. I might walk differently. You know, but somehow I think what we often do is we convince ourselves that God looks at us with disappointment. He looks at us with, you're not measuring up. You know, you did that again. You did that again. You know, when are you gonna fix your life and be the light of the world? When are you going to be good enough? And so I've known so much, and I have experienced myself so much of Christianity that is guilt-ridden, that I don't believe was meant to be that way. If we're meant to live in the grace of God, we are not meant to live in guilt. Now, there is a place for guilt. You know, there is a place for guilt. As someone says, guilt is a gift that keeps on giving. You know, there's a place for it. I mean, guilt tells us and warns us that especially something that we are doing now that is not good for us. You know, that's good. We need that. But what I've experienced beyond that is a sense of guilt, that we carry guilt for just not measuring up and being good enough for God. We carry guilt for things that we've done in the past, or things that we think we've done in the past, or things that we haven't done in the past that we wish we had done. And I just don't believe that that is how God looks at us when it says we're saved by grace. That is not the person I don't become the person I most want to be, the person that God has inspired and put into my heart to be, when I walk loaded down with guilt that he didn't bring for me to have. I believe that guilt is a product of a wrong system or a wrong kind of Christianity that we have, where we feel like we're supposed to walk around in guilt. We're supposed to walk around, I'm just not good enough. Now, as we talked in the story earlier, it's not about being arrogant and thinking I am good enough. You know, that's not it either. The whole problem is it's not about measuring up. It's about living in communion with God, with the creator of the universe. And it's about growing. Growing towards him, growing towards other people, growing towards being the person that I most want to be. It's about growing. It's about movement. It's not about measuring up. It's in 2012. Over and over I talked about love the person that you are. Love the person that you are this minute. You know, in a sense, the story of the tax collector who kind of beat his chest and said, God, have mercy on me. I'm a sinner. In a sense, in a very real sense, that was loving who he was at that moment. Now, we have to understand the word love. It's not this romantic, like, oh, isn't everything wonderful? Loving is giving yourself what you most need. Loving is nurturing yourself and giving yourself what you most need. And understanding that God loves us by giving us what we most need and we most desire. You know? And so to know that what I most need is humility and what I most need is God's mercy, that's loving myself. You know? That's loving. That's like getting up and I'm thirsty and I know I need water. And so I drink some water. That's loving myself. You know? It's the same thing when we know what we need and we go and we get it. That's loving yourself. So I need to get in agreement with God who loves me the way I am right now. Loves me as I am. It's knowing that God is not surprised by anything in my life. You know? There's times when we feel like we're going to let other people down, or we've let other people down, and maybe we've let God down, and maybe we have. But he's not surprised. We're not the first person to do it. You know? We're not the first person to fall short of the glory that God prepared for us. We're not. He's not surprised. It's also 2012 has been the year of be the person that you love. Be the person you love. And that can mean a lot of things, but it means two things specifically. And it means, let's start, make you the person that you love as well as everyone else. Love yourself. You be the person that you love. And you know what? I know a lot of Christians that are uncomfortable with that. And you know, so I hope that we've at least broken some ground this year about when we're uncomfortable with loving ourselves. That it's not an egotistical thing. It's not a thing that camouflages or glosses over who we really are. But it's an important thing that we love the person that we are. Be the person that you love. But also, it's also looking at the qualities that we really love in another human being and saying, well, why don't I be that? You know? I love a person who's encouraging. Well, hey, be the person you love. You love a person who kind of picks you up, you know, and has a good, positive thing to say. Well, be the person you love. We're all going to have unique personalities. But think about the person that you love. And I think that even the disciples, as they watched Jesus, must have been thinking, wow, I'd like to be like that. You know? I'd like to be like this. So be the person that you love. And, or be the person, and then finally, 2012, be the person that you most want to be. which is looking deep inside of us. And we all have this kind of person that we want to be at different times. But sometimes when we stop and we really reflect and we look deep inside, who is the person I most want to be? Who's the person and I love the stories through the Bible of how Jesus, when we do that, when we really settle with that, it gives us kind of a bigger vision of ourselves than we might normally have. You know, it's like Jesus saying, when he met Simon, and he says, your name's going to now be Peter, which means a rock. I don't know if Peter believed him at that time. I would imagine his brother probably didn't believe him. You know, said, him a rock? Are you kidding me? You know? But you're going to be, you didn't say, someday you'll be. He said, you are Peter, a rock. And we know enough of the story to know that Peter was, you know, in some ways wishy-washy, but we saw that coming to be what Jesus, he gave him a larger vision, this person. You know, be the person that you most want to be. I think he tapped into Peter's heart, wanting to be a rock. You know, God always gives us a bigger vision of ourselves than we would normally have without God. A greater vision of our character. Be the person that you most want to be. A couple things that I've said this year is that means to stop beating yourself up. Stop beating yourself up, because God doesn't do that. You know? And also stop blaming the world. Generally, we're probably we have one of those two mindsets. We blame ourselves for not measuring up. And so we attribute that to God. Well, he's beating me up because, you know, I haven't measured up, you know. Or we blame the world. Well, you know, I could have really been good, God. I could have made you happy. I could have measured up to what you want. But, you know, it's other people. It's my parents or whatever. I love J.K. Rowling's, right, who wrote
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter, yeah, Harry Potter. Saw a speech when she said, speaking to young people, she said, you know, there's an expiration date on blaming your parents. It expires, you know. But that's true of everybody and everything. There is an expiration date. But generally, we blame ourselves or we blame the world. Some of us are good at both. We blame the world and ourselves, you know. But in order to be the person you most want to be is to lay that all aside. And not attribute any of that to God. So we stop blaming, we stop beating ourselves up, and we learn to activate the Spirit of God that is inside of us. You know, Paul says this is a mystery that was hidden for all ages, and this mystery is that Christ lives in you. He says, don't quench that Spirit. Don't quench it. And there's so many ways that we can quench it. You know? And I think one of the ways we can quench it is just with this feeling of I just don't measure up. And we miss the whole point. We haven't been given the Spirit of Christ because we measure up. We've been given the Spirit of Christ because we can't measure up. But activate that Spirit within you. Activate that Spirit. And finally, I want to. In 2012, we started with Jesus' simple statement: love your neighbor as yourself. Love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. That was the answer to the question: what's the greatest commandment? You know, I haven't known many people that have tried to read this that haven't gotten a little overwhelmed. Even people who've read it all their lives, like myself, at times get a little overwhelmed. And even as a young person, having read this all my life and studied it and taken it in college, there were times when I thought, there's so many different people saying different things about it. Even within the conservative Christian world. Man, I just wish I could make some sense out of it. And I was most attracted to Jesus' statement. This is what it's all about. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and your mind. And even that can be, if it was just left there, could be a little, I don't know, I could work on loving God like that, and if that's all it was, then what I would need to do is get as far away from other people as I could, you know. And I don't know, have you ever felt like that the thing that gets in your way of having a great relationship with God is other people? You know? And yet Jesus added to that, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so I think that any desire to connect with God has to go through myself and other people. It goes directly through myself and other people. And so it's learning, as we said at the very beginning, to love ourselves and then treat other people with the same love. And so it's treating yourself with compassion, because God treats you with compassion. It's getting in agreement with God. It's treating yourself with gentleness, because God approaches you with gentleness. It's treating yourself with respect and dignity, because that's how God treats you, with respect and dignity. It's coming at yourself with grace, because God comes to you with grace. You know? It's being forgiving of yourself, because God forgives you. You know? It's desiring joy and a full overflowing heart for yourself, because that's what God desires for you. And then as we do that, I think it's almost, it maybe is impossible to treat yourself that way in view of God's mercy and not have that spill over to other people. You understand what I'm saying? In view of God's mercy, I think Paul uses that term. In view of God's mercy, here's how we're to act. You see, in light of God's mercy, like this tax collector that we just read about. In view of God's mercy, as he approached God and said, God, I just need your forgiveness. I need your mercy. Well, in view of that, if we then look at ourselves and treat ourselves with the compassion and forgiveness and dignity and care and gentleness and love that God gives us, with the desire to connect with God and the desire to activate the Spirit within us, it can't help but overflow to the people around us. You know, as we focus on that. Finally, on January 1st, I stood here and I said a couple things I want to repeat. Number one is that you and I have not been disqualified from becoming the person that we most want to be. Okay, we're all over 30 here, right? All right, except for Linda. But
yeah, she's getting close, though.
I'm 29.
all right, 29. I've done a few of those. But I dare say that if any of us have been asked when we were 21, who's the person you most want to be? Might be a different answer now. And without God's grace, we might look back and say we missed our opportunity on some things. And depending on how you answer that question, yeah, we have missed the opportunity on some things. But they may not be, and they are not the most critical thing. But I truly believe with all my heart that being the person that you were created to be, the person you most want to be, you have not been disqualified from that. Being a person of greatness, you have not been disqualified from that. In fact, from all that I know and all that I see and what I've experienced, is that all the disappointments that we faced, all the mistakes that we've made, all the heartaches that we've been through, the joys, the ups and downs, will contribute today